so I'm all excited about that. I just a little bit about my background. I have been with the Native Child Advocacy Resource Center for about 1.5 years. Prior to that, I ran a child advocacy center and a women's domestic violence program in rural southeastern Oklahoma for 18 years. I worked for my tribe for about 10 years, did a substance abuse and women and children substance abuse program prior to that. And this has been my life. I love this work. I love the prevention part of this work. I love the Child Advocacy Center model. And so I'm super excited to be able to talk to you guys today and really appreciate Deb and Stephanie asking me to be here. I want to talk to you a little bit about our Native Child Advocacy Resource Center. We are a Victim of Child Abuse Act partner, and we are funded specifically through the Department of Justice to work with Native nations in the development of an MDT team or a child advocacy center. We also work with non-Native partners to help develop relationships, more meaningful relationships with our tribal agencies. We can provide training and technical assistance on the development of tribal MDTs and CACs. We can provide training and technical assistance on any of those aspects that go along with the CAC, MDT partner development, working within the medical mental health field. We also will work with a partner to develop specific training for them if there's a specific area that they would like to have training in. And the good thing about this is it's all free. So our grant is, we are a training and technical assistance grant. And so all of our services are free. We are under the National Native Child Trauma Center, which is a Cat 2 trauma center funded by SAMHSA. That are on that side of our program. We have amazing trainers that do training in mental health, substance abuse. We also have a school program where we work with inside of the schools, our tribal schools, to work with staff and students. But our vision is that every Native nation would have a coordinated response to child abuse, child maltreatment that honors their cultural values, empowers healing, and contributes to a healthy community. And so that's my email is going to be at the end of this, and I think they're going to provide these slides. And so if anybody has any questions or would like to talk to us about training, we would love to talk to you about if there's anything that we can do to help your community.
And I just want to let everybody know, Deanna, that you also will be at the TSASP Institute. So she will be there too for you guys to talk to in person or get more information.
Yes, I'm excited. I'm going to see you guys in September. So I'm excited about that as well. Just a little bit about how I present. I do want you guys to know that if you have a question, just interrupt me, raise your hand, and I'll ask Deb to kind of watch those or enter it in the chat. If you're like me, I forget things by the time I get to the end, so I need to ask them when I'm thinking about them. If there's any, I always love lots of interaction. I just feel like that we learn best that way. So just throwing that out into Zoom land, that if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll talk through that. But I'm going to talk about child advocacy centers, what they are. And I want to do that before I start that. I would like to kind of get a little feel for everyone. Has anybody worked with a child advocacy center, or is there a child advocacy center connected or in your community? I can't see the chat because I'm in a big window. So
okay, Michelle Cook said yes. There is one in Akwesasne.
Oh, perfect. And do you work with them any, or have you been provided any training through them?
Hi, Deanna. Yeah, we work with them on a routine basis. We have monthly case meetings, and they do provide training.
Perfect. That's awesome. So you're attending the MDT meetings?
Yes.
Perfect. Great. Great.
And
Um,
Anna said, I'm new to this job.
okay. Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you some basic information about child advocacy centers, what they are, and then I really want to talk about advocates and supporting of child sexual abuse victims. And this is pretty basic too. I just wasn't sure like where we would be, but I really want to talk about. This has been my life's work. I've worked with many families. I was a forensic interviewer as well. So I've worked with many families on probably some of the hardest times of their lives in working through these victimizations of their children. So I really want to have a talk about how to do that and how to work with these families effectively. And I'm also really welcome to hear all of your great experience in this area. So if anybody has anything that they'd like to add, I love to hear those as well. So there are some TSAP purpose areas that child advocacy centers would fulfill. And I've kind of put that in there about providing victim services to victims and their families, that crisis intervention and support. Our advocates are tasked to have information on almost wraparound services. So we are tasked to develop those kinds of services, those kinds of referral services. We're developed by the CACs are developed by the community. One of the things that we really are talking to our tribal nations about is developing their own MDT and CACs, and we are gaining ground every day on that. We are up to about 12, and we have some the MDTs that are developing. But we really feel like that our tribal nations having their own CAC and implementing their own ways of knowing and being are really the most effective in our communities. So just without a CAC, I'm old, and so I'm from that era when this coordinated response didn't exist. And so what it looked like was this first side of this picture on this left is without a CAC, we had a child and their family in the middle. And if there was a report of child abuse, it was just crazy. So law enforcement might get it, CPS might get it, and they would both be working with these families separately. Then they may have to send them to the hospital. And so the hospital then would ask these families and these victims the same questions and that they'd already answered, maybe with law enforcement and CPS, and then have to answer to the medical. And then the prosecution would come in, and then referrals for mental health might or might not happen. So it was just a mess. And what happened is these CACs bring this coordinated response in where they're kind of the middleman for everyone. And so everyone comes to the agency and these services are happening, and it's much more trauma informed, much more about that victim and their families and making sure that we're decreasing that trauma as much as we can. And we converted this, so some of this is a little bit wonkered, but this is actually a picture of my child advocacy center that I ran for 18 years. And they're intentionally made to look like homes so that kids would come in and feel comfortable. They're community-based, child-friendly, trauma-informed programs. They bring together all of these partners under one in one place to work with these victims and families and provide those wraparound services that is incredibly important at this stage for these families. So just the benefits of a child advocacy center. So it's developed by the community. And I think that we all know that we know our communities best. And so we know those players that need to be at the table. We know the players that we have to have at the table to make these teams a success. We know what our community provides and doesn't provide, and the things that our families need and don't need. And so the development of the CAC, one of the beauties of it is that it's developed by our communities and implemented by our communities because we know our communities. It's the home to that MDT team, and that MDT is those core disciplines: law enforcement, child protection, prosecution, mental health, medical, and victim advocacy. And those are the core team members, but because it's developed by that community, it can have other people, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We might have a cultural healer that we want to have on our team. We may have some school-based people that we feel like are useful to have on the team, but because it's community developed, you can decide who you want on that team, and that's what makes it so individual to who you are as a community. Forensic interviewers, and this is another area. Does everybody kind of know what a forensic interviewer is? I am going to talk about it just a little bit. It's probably one of the things that I love most about my job was my ability. When you work in a rural area and a not-for-profit, and you're the director, you're also the forensic interviewer, the advocate, the janitor, the van driver. And so I do a little bit of it all, but the forensic interview is something that I really, really, really love. It's an interview. You're trained in a specific way. The interview is conducted so it's admissible in court. We're trained to ask children questions in a non-leading way. A lot of our interviews we talk about home life, and we call it we're narrative practice, and we talk about, tell me what you did when you got to school, if you're in school, and the first thing that you do, the next thing that you do, and we're practicing with the kids on how to tell us a story. And it kind of gauges for us how much detail the kids can give us. We conduct these interviews. We talk to them about this event, and we do it in a way to hopefully not. These are traumatic events, and talking about them causes more trauma. So we want to do an interview with all of our partners there. The interviews are conducted in one room. Our partners are in another. They're watching through a television. They're through television monitors. And these are admissible in court. So prosecution, law enforcement, our child welfare agencies, our medical can all watch these interviews of these children. And then that allows this child to tell their story one time and not have to tell this over and over and over again to all these multiple agencies. The other thing about CACs that I love is the comprehensive services. So a lot of our CACs have forensic interviews. They do sexual assault exams. They do mental health therapy. They do all of those on site in one building. One of my favorite things is the first 10 years that I ran our CAC, we didn't have mental health on site. And I wrote some applications to add mental health. And it was probably one of the best things that I ever did, because we saw our families a lot of times at their absolute most traumatic, worst days. And we would watch these families and these victims come in, and they would go through our mental health program. And at graduation, we had a big graduation for them, and we would have cupcakes or cookies, and we would celebrate them finishing that mental health treatment. And it was really healing for our staff to have that ability to just watch those kiddos as they move through that healing process. Victim advocates, I tell this a lot, and I think I didn't ask what everybody does, but I think that most on here are victim advocates and or fulfilling that role. But our victim advocates are the most important people in our center. And the reason I say that is the victim advocates sit on that multidisciplinary team with all of these different agencies, but the victim advocates speak for our families. They bring that perspective to these team meetings to really say, the family feels this way, or this is what the family needs. And so inside of that CAC, those victim advocates are so incredibly important to make sure that we all stay focused on the most important people, and that's this victim and the families that are with them. Our victim advocates have these wraparound services. So if maybe they want to have mental health services and it's too far away, the victim advocates would be able to help them find a mental health provider. They would have access to concrete services, housing, access to our victims' compensation funds, so that if there was something that we would help them do those applications for that victim compensation fund, whether it be paying for mental health services or getting reimbursement for taking off time and coming there, gas vouchers, just whatever that family need in a way of concrete services. Our victim advocates are responsible for doing that, and they are amazing at what they do. The whole thing is that this is all provided in this trauma-informed framework. We don't want to add additional trauma to an already traumatic situation. We want to decrease trauma for these children and families as much as possible. We're in this case from them from the initial all the way through the prosecution. And then if mental health services are provided even longer than prosecution, however long it takes that child to complete that mental health therapeutic process. So advocacy centers are involved with the families for a very long time. And, our whole goal is to decrease trauma and to be there as a resource for these families. So this coordinated response, it really does, and I'm going to have to try to get this moved around. So the coordinated response, it really leads to better outcomes. What I've seen for many, many, many years is that if we bring us all together, we have a better response for our cases, our case closures. We have a better response for our families and leading them on that journey to healing. So if we bring all our systems together, we work together to meet the needs of those families more effectively. And I always tell this story because I think it's really, really powerful, is sometimes as agencies, we all come to the table with our own goals. And we have this family, this case in the middle, and we're doing a multidisciplinary team meeting. And we get sidetracked a little bit because our goal might be that if we're child welfare, our goal is going to be making sure that child's safe, and these families are, if there's a reunification plan, or if they're in the home, making sure those children are safe, and prosecution wants to prosecute, and law enforcement wants to put people in jail. And we were at a meeting. It was a very difficult case, and we were all very on edge about it. And we're talking about this child, and it was a teenager, and they were rebelling, and we were having some really difficult times. And our therapist, who was amazing, was sitting there, and she's listening to all of us. And she and the advocate are both sitting there watching us. And anyway, she finally says, "I want everybody to stop and take a breath. And then I want you to tell me why this child is responding in this way." And she redirected us all to the most important person in that room, which was this victim. And they were responding in a way that it was a trauma response. They were responding from this trauma. And when we all just stopped a minute, and she redirected us, and then the victim advocate came in and said, "And this is where we're at, and this is the things that the family feels like they need, and this is what the victim feels like they need," then we were like, okay, let's get back on to the most important people in this room. And it's not us. It's not me. It's not about me. I have two signs that are in my offices everywhere I've ever been. And one of them says, "It's not about me." And the other one is, "Much that feels personal is not personal at all." Because in dealing with families, especially trauma impacted families, we have to remember that they might respond to us in a way that might feel very as a personal attack, but it's not personal. That team strategy to victim services is a holistic approach to that child. It's to that child victim and their families, always making sure that we're putting them in that middle and that we're remembering who they are as a team. And just better prosecution. We, in our county that my CAC was in, our goal was to not do trial. Our goal was to have a case that was so good that we would get a plea deal. And we were very, very successful at that. And, if we had a victim, if we had a perpetrator that was in their 50s and we got, a 25-year sentence, these in our state are 80% crimes, that person was going to, more than likely was not going to get out. And so our goal was, our prosecution rates were very high when we did this as a team, from this perspective. So I want to talk a little bit, I want to end right here with the CAC. I just really want to talk a little bit about what they were, why they're important, why that coordinated response leads to better outcomes. But I just want to give just a few minutes to just see if anybody has any questions or has any experience working with these teams that they'd like to share. Or has any questions about establishing a team or a CAC. I just want to take just a few minutes here that we can kind of open that up for dialogue. And I can't see the chat, so if there's any.
There's nothing in the chat. No, nothing in the chat.
Okay. Okay. Well, if that is an interest to anybody, or you'd like to talk through that for your community, one of the things that we do that I didn't talk about in this, I will talk about when we in September. I have a much longer presentation for September, but one of the things that we do talk about is having a tribal multidisciplinary team. And we've done that in several areas. One area is my tribe, the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. They decided to have a tribal multidisciplinary team and established a tribal team. They worked with state CACs, and inside of that, and the state CACs, because the Choctaw Nation is very large, it's almost 11, covers 11 counties in southeastern Oklahoma. There are 4 state CACs there. So they established a tribal multidisciplinary team. State CACs still provided forensic interviewing advocacy services, but the tribe staffed all of their own cases. Their prosecution was there from the tribe, and they staffed all their own cases. It was incredibly successful, and they actually developed a tribal CAC from that team. So those are things that we're seeing a lot across the country, is our Native nations are deciding that they want to staff their cases with their own teams so that they can have their cultural healers there. They can talk about implementing, getting them into referrals for ceremony, if that's what they want to do, having their own ability to smudge. We have a tribal CAC in Washington that they offer smudging if that's something that the family would like to have access to. It's something that they offer out of their CAC. They have these really cool little smudge kits that they send home with their families. We have other CACs that have their own ceremonies attached to those CACs. One of our CACs, one of our tribal CACs in South Dakota, they have a wonderful cultural healer on staff, and he goes out with the families and talks to the victims about where they come from within their tribal history, where their families come from. It's incredibly healing and connecting that victim back to their communities. So we have some really great tribal CACs that are doing some amazing work and very specific to who they are as a community. And I love it. I just, every time I'm just with any of them, I'm just sitting, I'm so incredibly impressed and in awe of all the things that they do. So those are things that if it's an interest to any of your tribal groups, that's certainly something we'd love to talk to you about. So I want to talk about when children disclose outside of the CAC. One of the things that happens is if there's not a CAC, or if the families may not want to go to a state agency, they may come to our tribal partner. They may come to your agency as advocates. They probably are, you're probably someone that they've worked with before, they developed a relationship with, so they would come and say, and this isn't, this could be a place that they would come to. And so when children disclose, I really want to talk about minimal facts interviews. And one of the things that I always recommend is kind of having a plan in place before it happens, so that you've got that plan and you kind of know what to do, what information is needed for you to make these referrals on to either your law enforcement agency, your child welfare, or if you have a child advocacy center that you work with, to that child advocacy center, whatever it is in your particular state. Those vary from tribe to tribe on what the process for reporting is. In my tribe, we have an 800 number that's for our tribal child welfare, and then we also have an 800 number for our state. And if we report to our state, depending on where it is, if we report to our state, then our state also refers them on to our child welfare departments and our law enforcement. One thing about CACs is that we work with all of those agencies, and so we typically have that relationship already built with tribal partners. And so we know if we have a case, then we'll ask those questions about, do you belong to a Native nation? Are you enrolled in a Native nation? And then we will also be able to make those referrals and make sure that our tribal partners are at the table. But minimal facts interviews are incredibly important. They're really about this trauma-informed approach of making sure that we are not asking these children questions before. Hopefully we could do a forensic interview, or somebody would come in and do an interview with law enforcement or child welfare, whatever the process is in your community. But these minimal facts interviews, most of this information can be gathered from the adult that's in the situation, so we don't even have to talk to the children. I am going to talk to you a little bit about what happens if a child discloses as well. But it's really about just gathering enough information to determine to determine the things that the people that you're going to report to need to know. So what happened, just those basic details. It doesn't have to be, she disclosed to us that when she was at, such and such home, that they touched her under her clothes. So we know that there's going to be some the skin to skin contact, but just those basic details of what happened. We can get that from the adult. Who did it, and the reason that we ask that is if it's a third-party perpetrator, which is someone outside of that family, then that's going to be a law enforcement case. If it's a person that's within the family, then that's going to be a law enforcement and a child welfare case. So that who did it is important. Sometimes it may not be known, and that's okay. Then that would go to law enforcement, and then hopefully in that interview, they could figure out who that person was. In my experience, most of those cases where there's someone where they don't really know who did it are going to be maybe older kids that are at a party, this happened to them, and they might not know who they were. But that who did it, when we ask that question, that's why. Who else may be a victim? So this is another thing, that if this is a familial person that has access to this child, but there are other children in the home, then we need to know that, because those are also going to be potentials that we need to go ahead and do forensic interviews on as well. So knowing if there are other children in that home is going to help them establish who all needs to be interviewed. Where did it happen? And that's kind of, we need to know where it happened so that we know where jurisdiction is. So if it's on your reservation, then there's a process for whether it be that we're going to send that to tribal law enforcement, or we're going to send it to the federal law enforcement. Whoever handles that will, knowing where it happened is one of those really important questions to know who we need to report to as well. When did it happen? And the when is can be an approximation, but you can get the kind of narrowed down to those questions of when did it happen, and they'll say, well, I'm not really sure. Then the next question could be, when's the last time this person would have had access to the child? The reason that we ask that when question is really focused around the sexual assault exams. There's some specific time frames within there that you would complete a kit, and that kind of varies from state to state. 72 hours, 120 hours, but there's some variations in that with when people would do a kit. Child advocacy centers offer medical exams to any child, regardless of when it happened. And the reason for that, some people are, just are like, why would you do that? But the reason for that is, and I'll tell you a little story. We had a little girl come in, and her incident had happened about a year and a half prior to her actually disclosing. Delayed disclosures are incredibly a norm in this particular area. But when we did this, we did offer them a medical, and they decided to do that. This medical is not a completion of a kit. It's really just making sure that everything looks good. And when the little girl set up, she said, she told our nurse, she said, am I broken? And the nurse said, no, you're perfectly normal. And she's just started crying, and she had thought that something was broken in her and it wasn't going to be fixable. And just that, having that medical person say, no, you're fine, you're perfectly normal, was just such a relief to this little girl. And I've seen that over and over again. So there are two kind of medical avenues that you could go through. The SANE kit, which is going to be a kit that's a collection for evidence that's going to go to your state labs and be ran for DNA or anything that would lead to the arrest. And then the other exam is the one that I just described. That's really just about making sure that our victims know that everything's okay. But that when did it happen really kind of dictates that exam that we do to collect evidence. Tribal involvement. This is something that we do for everybody, this particular one. And so we want to make sure that we're asking those questions. Our state CACs, I train a lot with state CACs. I want to make sure that they're asking those questions of, is anyone tribal that's involved in this, so that we make sure that we're getting those and what tribe they belong to, so that we make sure that we're getting these referrals made to the appropriate people. And so we want to make sure that we're doing that. So what to avoid? These are always things that I always have to go through and remind myself of these two. Avoid using our own words. And this specifically, we'll give you some examples of this, focuses around the use of their words for their genitalia. So if they come in and they refer to their vagina as an apple, then you want to make sure that if you repeat that you're using the words that they used. And we don't want to use a vagina if that's not the word they use, because they could pick up on that. And then in the forensic interview, they might say, well, this lady said it's called this. And we want to make sure that we are using the words that they use. Don't ask for details beyond what's needed. It's our natural inclination as a parent, it's our inclination as workers to feel like we need those details. But in this particular case, we just need those minimal facts, because we want to make sure that when these victims are talking about these particular incidents, that they're talking to them in this forensic interview or in this formal interview. And because we're going to ask them, have you told anybody else about this? And so they might say, well, I told my mom, or I told my dad, but or I told my teacher. But we want to make sure that we're keeping that down as much as possible, so that when they're telling those details, it's that it may not be the first time, but it's gonna be a time where we can kind of walk through who they've told. Asking yes or no questions, those just tend to be really difficult. And so if we want to ask a clarifying question, to try to not make it a yes, no. Asking why, no one knows. I mean, that's not going to be, I think our families may feel like, I don't know why this happened. Why? I mean, I have no idea. I don't know why it happened. I don't know. And they already feel this is a really traumatic time for them. Asking why they hadn't told. And I will tell you, delayed disclosures in this field are the norm. It's just normal. We have, in our particular, because we're a very rural center, we had adult victims that would come in that had never told about that traumatic event. About their assaults, and maybe they happened from 8 to 12, and we would see them at 22. There are a lot of reasons that people don't tell. They feel guilty, they feel like it was their fault, and they don't tell because of those things. And asking them why they hadn't told, it just doesn't help. It doesn't help anybody. And I think sometimes we wonder, well, why didn't you tell? But there's so many variables in that particular question that there's not an answer sometimes. Asking what the suspect might have been thinking, because they're probably not going to know. I mean, it is something that you're thinking, what in the world? But that's not going to be something that's helpful or useful to this family. So those are things to just really think about, to avoid asking the family, to really just stick with those minimal facts interviews and then making those referrals. What to say to the parents. This is one of the things that I really like. If you're referring them, and it's not just to a CSC, but if you're referring them on to, if inside of your agency, the process may be that if someone comes in, you do the minimal facts interviews, and then you're going to refer to you're going to call law enforcement and your child welfare group, then what to say to the families about that. And you can replace the CAC in here, but you can say, we want to make sure that everyone is comfortable and relaxed while waiting to be seen. The CAC is going to provide that. And hopefully you would have if you don't have a CAC, there's a process in your community that has a child-friendly place for them to go. But we're going to send them to a place that's safe, where children can tell their stories, and in the least traumatic, in the least most trauma-informed way that we can. We're going to assure that the children are going to know that the parents are going to be nearby while they're doing this. We also want to make sure that we're telling the parents that one of the things too that we're going to do here is that we're going to have the people that are in charge of investigating these cases all in one spot. So hopefully our kids are not going to have to continue to tell these stories, that we can tell them with everybody there. We're going to make sure that we're using language that to help these parents use language to support their children. Language is incredibly important, and what we say and how we say it's really important. So we want to make sure that we're telling them safe and truthful examples. So one of the things that I like to do is, if there's a disclosure that's been made, I like to say, you're going to talk to someone about what you told me. And that's all we need to say. We can say it's going to be in a safe place and we're going to be nearby. But those safe, truthful examples of, we're going to go talk to someone about what you told me. And then if there's no disclosure made, a really simple thing is you're going to talk to someone about safety, because that's really what we're talking about, is safety. If the kids don't make a disclosure, then we're going to talk to them about their bodies and about those places that your bathing suit covers. And we're going to talk to them about touching and tickling and those kinds of things, and really talk to them about the safety of their body. We're going to identify safe people to talk to, so that they have a plan, that if there is anything that ever does happen and it makes them feel icky or uncomfortable, that there's a safe person that we've identified to talk to. And we always ask them, is there someone that if this ever happens that you could talk to? And they'll say, oh, my mom or my teacher or my Grammy or my auntie. But there's going to be, we're going to establish those in our forensic interviews, and hopefully if they don't have a forensic interviewer, that those child welfare or law enforcement would also work to establish somebody, a plan for those kids going forward. But I always tell them safe, truthful examples are the best thing to do with when we're working with our kids and our families, is to give them, just talk to them from truth. And so those are a couple things just to really think about when you're talking to the families.
I would just like to add that under TSAS that, like, I really like the way you're incorporating the whole family, and under the TSAS grant, that's what you can do if you have a victim that comes in. There you are allowed to work with the whole family. So if it is the wife that is sexually assaulted or the child that's sexually assaulted, you could work with the kids, because now mom's, not the same as she was before, or the husband. So that's one thing about the TSAS grant, that you can, work with the whole family.
Yeah. And I didn't really address these from an adult perspective, although I've worked with adult sexual assault survivors. I used to tell people that I worked for victims that were from birth to 99. I had them all in our county. And so I think a lot of these things about being trauma informed and trying to work from this multidisciplinary team, but really decreasing trauma. When we're working with those adult victims, it really, really is important to make sure that we understand those trauma responses and how they may respond to us. They may be very different if you're working with an adult victim. And just remember, there's no one way that any victim that's normal for any victim to do. I know we may think that they need to present this way or they need to present this way, but all victims have trauma responses that are specific to who they are. So some may shut down, some may cry, some may be angry, some may have inappropriate emotions, or you may think they're inappropriate emotions. They're just trauma responses. I worked with a victim one time and she giggled through the whole interview, and the law enforcement person I was working with says, I don't understand why she's giggling. And I said, it was just her trauma response. And I said, it was almost like a nervous laugh. And I said, that's just the response that her body was using to cope with what was going on. And so when we're working with those adult victims, it is a little, it's a little bit different, but I think those safe, truthful, just safe and truthful examples and safe and truthful ways that we deal with them are the most important, because I think that in that moment, that's what they need. They need us to be honest with them. They need to look at us as being a safe person to talk to, and they need to look at us as being someone that is ready for them when they're ready to walk through that with us, because they may not be ready at that point. I always told my adult victims that this is your body, this is your decision, what you want to do with this. And we would always try to get them to do at least an exam, so that they had some options on the other side. So if it had happened and we, I'd really encourage them to do an exam. They didn't have to do anything with it. It can just be, it can be something that we held at our lab, but it did give them options for later on if, when we got past this and they processed through this and they decided they wanted to follow through with prosecution or the investigation and prosecution, that they would be able to do that. I think that just how you can support those families, the first thing is just being there in whatever way that they need you to do. I've had families that were very angry. I used to tell our law enforcement, mad dads and moms are my forte. I mean, I can walk them through that. Sad dads and moms, I can do that too. But just really supporting them where they are and not making them feel like that their response wasn't okay. I used to sit with our families that were mad, and the dads, typically dads were really, it was a struggle for them. And I would say, your feelings are absolutely justified. Let's talk about what you're going to do with those, because there's a right way to go about this, and then there's a way that's not going to be as helpful. And so really talking to them about that, the way that they feel is absolutely okay. But what are we going to do with those feelings? Especially that anger part of this is, there are certain ways that we need to do this for the investigative part, and to making sure that we're supporting this, that we are not taking our own emotions and making this harder. So really walking those families through, supporting them and letting them know that the way they feel is absolutely okay. But let's talk about where we're going with those feelings. Encourage them. One of the hardest things I think about this particular, this child sexual assaults is the guilt that these families feel. They feel incredibly guilty. They feel like they're failures. And I always wanted to just encourage them that I know that you may feel this way today, but I promise that it's going to be better. There's going to be an end to this tunnel. And it's okay if you feel that way, but I do want to encourage you that this is not the way that you're going to feel forever. I also wanted to encourage families, because a lot of families that are going through this particular, this child sexual abuse or adult sexual abuse, I also wanted to make sure that they understood that this is not life ending, that you can recover from this, you can heal from this. Our children can heal, you can heal, and you can go on and do all the great things that you had planned to do with your life, and they could go on and do all the great things that they're going to do with their lives as they grow. Because a lot of people don't see past this particular event. And so it's really difficult for them as they are looking down the road to not think that this is going to affect them forever. And this is something that is going to impact them, but it's not something that has to dictate their lives. And that's why mental health therapy, our ceremonies that we refer our families to, are so incredibly important, because that's part of that healing process. And you can heal from this, and you can go on and do all those things that you were going to do, and have really good, amazing lives. But there's a process to that too. And so really making sure our families understand, encouraging them to walk that healing journey, and really talking to them about the importance of that is one of the things that I tell everyone, that that this particular part of this is so important. Being honest, this is probably one of the hardest cases. Child sexual assaults in general are very difficult cases. They're difficult cases to investigate, because we have delayed disclosures from our kids. We have a lot of times, like I said, they may not disclose until they're adults. So depending on the laws in your state, they're difficult cases to prosecute because there's not going to be a lot of evidence left. And so I always wanted to be honest with our families about that process. Not deterring them in any way, but really saying, this is what it looks like. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's not something that this investigation's not going to be done in 24 hours. Unfortunately, CSI doesn't really exist in real life. We're not going to be able to get, DNA off a sidewalk 6 months later. But this is a process, and our law enforcement, our prosecutors, and those child welfare workers that are working these cases are the best, and they're going to work really hard to make sure that these cases are done and done correctly. But just really being honest with the family, also being honest about this process too. There's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days. And eventually you'll have more good days than bad. And eventually you'll go back to hopefully having those good days as the norm. But just being really honest with them about that process and what they are going to be experiencing. I also really think that one of the parts about being honest here too is about being honest about the process that everybody goes through. This is there are so many agencies that are involved in these type of investigations, and not everyone could be as trauma informed as we'd like them to be. But if there's a problem, that the advocates, we want to speak in these meetings for you. So we want to make sure that we're going to be honest with you. And if there's a problem, to be honest with us, that we want to be able to help. If there's someone that's making you feel, not making you feel supported, or not sharing the way that you feel like they do, I think as advocates, our CAC support staff, that's one of the things that we could help with. And so really being honest to us too about all the good and the bad, that if there's something that is not going the way that you feel like it is, to be honest with us and make sure that we understand. And you're not going to upset us if you say, this has been done and I don't like it. That's what we're here for, is just to really have those conversations together. Understanding the trauma response. I think I told you guys a while ago that it's not about me, and much that feels personal is not personal at all. A lot of times our families get frustrated, and they're frustrated with the process. They're frustrated with our partners. Maybe they're frustrated with that healing journey, that they don't feel like maybe it's going as quickly, and it's a struggle. Maybe they're having a bad day. And so they might respond to us. We may be the ones that get that response. And just remember that it's not about you. It's not personal to you. It really is about their response and their frustration. And really remembering that as we might have these really difficult conversations with them. One of the things that I always said is, it's okay if this is okay. If this is what you need right now, then I'm big enough to handle those things. And typically all of my families would come back and they'd say, Deanna, I'm just really having a bad day. And I'm like, it's okay. It's okay. It doesn't matter, and I wanted all of our families to never feel like that they couldn't come back after having a bad day, and that I'm still going to be here. I'm still going to work just as hard for you, but just to really understand those responses, and that they may not be always kind to us, and that's okay. It's not personal. Understanding their ability to process information. When we have trauma, if we look at that brain response to trauma, we know that we have that our brain shuts down, it goes into protect mode, it goes into survival mode. And so a lot of times those higher functioning levels or those higher functions of our brain aren't particularly engaged at that point. And so we may be giving them a lot of information from the beginning, and they may not process any of that. One of the things that I always suggest, and I have some really great examples of this if anybody'd be interested in it, is we always did a book, and inside of that book, we had a small book that had our name and number. And we wrote the investigator's name and number, advocate's name and number. Everybody was in this book. We had a place in the back of the book for questions. If you think about questions when you leave here, write those down. We had a place where they could talk about where it actually went through the investigative process, what that looked like, what was going to happen at our CAC, but also what was going to happen in that investigative process. And we gave that written material to the families, because a lot of times if we're sitting and we're talking to them, they're not comprehending what we're saying just because of that trauma response that they're in right at the moment. We tried really hard not to overwhelm them with things, making lists, giving them that book, giving them things that they could read later when they weren't in that particular response. I always really recommend that in dealing with these families. I think that if we think about if we were in that same situation, our minds would be going in 1,000 different directions. And so the easier that we can make it on our families, the better. The better that they're going to appreciate that later, because they're going to be going, I know that they told me these things and I have no idea what they said, but we're going to give them something to be able to take with them so that they'll be able to refer to that later. Contact information. One of the things, and this is really, I think, important if you're working with law enforcement, this is one of the things that we implemented, is because is before law enforcement leaves that they provide them with a card. It was something that we implemented for our team. And so law enforcement, before they would leave, they would come and meet with the families and make sure that all of those families had contact information for them. And it just really makes that family feel like that you see them and that you hear them. We would give them contact information with inside of that folder that we would give them. And then we would make sure that if someone didn't have a card, that we would write down all of that contact information within the folder inside of our folder, within the little brochure thing inside the folder. That this encouraged them to write down questions that's inside of this little form that we would give them, where they would have questions, because in that situation, a lot of our families were like, they didn't know what questions they were going to have, or it was just too much. There was just too much trauma at that moment. But then later, it might be 3 days later, they'd be like, oh man, I wish I would have asked this, and this. And so giving them a place to do that and really encouraging them to write those questions down is very, very important to these families, because they'll be able to go back and say, oh yeah, I remember thinking about this and I wanted to know this, or I remember thinking about this and I wanted to know this. But really just thinking about how these families, where they are at that moment and what's going to be the best for them 2 or 3 days later, a week later, 2 weeks later. One of the things with the Advocacy Center movement is that the advocates will call these families, and typically in about 3 days, 3 to 5 days after they've had some time to kind of de-escalate, and the advocates would call and say, I'm just checking in. I want to make sure that we answered all your questions, or I want to make sure that, are there any things that you've identified since you've left that we can help you do? But those are really important things for these families, because in this moment, they may not they may not be able to even process what they're going to need later on. And so that really encouraging them to do that. So these are just the resources that I wanted to go through with you guys. And these are the Victims of Child Abuse Act grantees. So these are specifically tasked with providing training and technical assistance to CACs, MDTs, as well as our partners. And so the first is the Native Child Advocacy Resource Center. I kind of talked to you guys about what we do. Then we have the National Children's Alliance. The National Children's Alliance, they also do training and technical assistance. networking opportunities. They are the agency that does accreditation for child advocacy centers, MDTs that if you have an MDT that forms, you can apply as a freestand, or you can apply as an MDT team. One of the things that I love about NCA is they have tons and tons of funding. And so if you have a team in your community or a CAC in your community, and they are involved with NCA. NCA has low to no cost mental health training that can be provided in the community. They have medical training. They have grants to to hire different kinds of staff. They have grants for equipment purchases. Great, a great resource if you are involved with them. The regional child advocacy centers. So we have 4 regional child advocacy centers. If they are also great resources that you can access. They all have websites. On their websites, they have tons and tons of training materials that you can go in and look at. So we have the Northeast, and they serve Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Vermont. Southern region is the biggest region that we have. They serve Alabama, Arkansas, Delaware, District of Columbia, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, and West Virginia. And then the Western region serves Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, New Mexico, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. And the Midwest serves Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. And so all of those, these are their websites. I encourage you to go look at their websites. Like I said, they have wonderful training. They're each kind of known for specific things. Midwest, if you have questions about medical, a lot of our medical training comes out of the Midwest region. Western region does a lot of specific training with our Native nations, and Southern region does a lot of training around multidisciplinary teams and the development of multidisciplinary teams and the development of partners. Northeast region does they do a lot of training around leadership, and so they have a leadership academy that they're kind of known for. So everyone kind of is known for something, but we all do a lot of the same things as far as development of MDTs and CACs. Another thing that I always recommend is in our states, we have state CAC chapters, and they are probably the most amazing resources that you could access if you wanted to be involved in some training for advocacy, involved in some training for mental health or medical or partner development. A lot of our state chapters would welcome you to be to train with them. They really have their fingers on what their states are doing, what you're eligible for in different states. I always refer people to the state chapter because they know if there's been some specific funding in states for development of MDTs and CACs. So they're really great resources. And you can find the state chapter, and you just Google it, the state of Oklahoma, which is what I'm really familiar with. Our state chapter, Carrie Little's our state chapter director, and she and I do a lot of training. She's incredibly dedicated to the development of CACs and MDTs within our tribal nations. And so she does understand state funding and understands the eligibility around that state funding. So the state chapters are really amazing resources if you have one. And I think most states have state chapters, or they have state chapters may cover a couple of states if they're smaller. So these organizations are just tribally specific services on or training that you could do. TLPI, we have some contracts with TLPI to develop some different products for us, but TLPI really has a lot of information on tribal code, different codes. They have they're just a really wealth of information. And so I always really recommend people look at the TLPI website. National Indian Child Welfare Association has great resources, lots of examples of different kinds of materials that might be used. Also really are the experts in the Indian Child Welfare Act. And so they're amazing resource. And the Tribal Child Victim and Witness Support Material. If you guys haven't seen these, this is developed from the Office of Victims of Crime. And these are specifically developed for our tribal communities to talk about that process of court. And so they're trauma informed, they're appropriate for different ages, but they talk about they talk about like the court process, and so there are a lot of about victim support materials. But you can access these and print them for free. They did have it, I need to probably check, and I apologize that I didn't, but they did have it where you could also order some materials for them that were already printed that you could give to the families that you're working with if they're involved in a court process, so that just for them to understand that witness support. And so there is a link. I do have that link, so I'm hoping that you can just click onto that from the from this PowerPoint. The Amber Alert Indian Country, I was honored to talk at their conference in New Orleans, and so I just wanted to put this in here that if in your communities that they don't have Amber Alert, there's a specific group that does TA and development within our tribal group, within our Native Nations, that you can have an Amber Alert specific for your reservation or your tribal community. And this came out of a really terrible case out of the Navajo reservation. And the mother of one of the victims was really instrumental in the legislation to have an Amber Alert in Indian Country. So if it's not something you guys have looked at, I recommend it. I think it's wonderful. And, it's something that I just really wanted to promote. This is it's a tribal resource tool. So it's a mapping tool, and it's funded by the Office of Victims of Crime. And it's listings of services that are available for survivors, gaps of services. It's a really interesting tool if you haven't looked at it as well. The National Criminal Justice Training Center, they have some really great tribal resources. If you haven't looked at some of their stuff, there were a couple that I identified. The VAT training, I always recommend people look at VAT training. It's free and it's updated very regularly, but it really talks about a lot of our working within our tribal systems. And so it has some great training in there. And then there's a couple of other that were some just tribal resources that I just put in there where you can click and go to them if you wanted to. So just questions and comments this time. I just really like to hear if you guys had any questions or tell us about what's working in your community. I always love to hear those about what's working. The other thing too, just as far as questions that I'd be interested in, is if you guys are, I know, I can't remember who that said that they were actually, there's a CAC, and it sounded like maybe you were going to their MDT meetings, but I always want to know about that process in community. If you are you're attending those MDT meetings and how that feels for you, if your voice is being heard and honored. And so this is just a time that, if you have any questions that or comments, that I'd love to have those.
I know Kathleen said that she used to do an intern at a CAC in Massachusetts.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
And
I love CAC models, so I'm always glad to hear people that have some experience with it.
I'll say one thing. So it was like in a town that was really like more diverse and like city. So down the Cape, they'll have like maybe 20 cases in 4 months, and we would have about 200 in that many, you know?
Yeah.
And it was statewide, but being there, I was like the only person that was like Indigenous and a person of color. So again, they're like, oh, I think they're Portuguese. And I was like, then they're like, no, they're Spanish. And granted, I was the intern, so I had to like be quiet, but I'm like, obviously when I talk to the client, it's like, okay, I can't overstep my boundaries. And I was older than a lot of the people there, but so it was pretty different. But
Yeah.
also I have a sister-in-law that works in another CAC that they partner with. So she knows who we are. So she's been actually, one of my tribe has been going there to train them now, their sister site, like to let them know that we're here. So
Yeah. And that's something that we're really working on. That's one of the things that we've been tasked with is work with those non-tribal CACs so that they really start identifying Indigenous families and victims that they're working with and making sure that they are getting them those resources from their tribe that they could access. And I think that sometimes, because I'm from Oklahoma, we have such a large Indigenous population that I would forget. It was just a standard thing that we would ask, you know, are you a tribal member? And what tribe are you a member of? And I didn't realize until I started this job that that's not something that everybody asks. And so as I'm doing training across the country, I really talk to non-tribal CACs about identifying these tribal members and making sure that we are connecting them back to their tribe if that's something that they want to do.
I do have a question going back to the what to avoid and everything like that. Usually I would get minors clients, but this is after they had met with the CAC, and I'm just wanting to know, like, if there's training out there for advocates that pretty much like on how to question or talk to them after they have seen them. I don't want to come off too strong and then something happens to where I'm having to sit in court. That's where I struggle a little bit. But lately it's just been nothing but minors, and again, I don't want to come off strong, and it's a struggle that I'm trying to learn from.
Do you know why tell me about what they would be in your office for? Would it be for access to services?
Yeah, it's mainly just for like help, mainly like well, I need help with gas fuel to get to and from counseling. I'm having to go to appointments, and but my daughter and my son has been, sexually assaulted, and I just don't know how. I'll ask questions, but I don't want to say something that's coming off too strong, and it just, that's what
I think those, even if you're just implementing those minimal facts interviews, one of the things that I really feel strongly about when I'm working with families is letting them guide me. So if they're coming in there and they're telling me, this is what's happened to our family, these are the services that I need, then, I walk through those services with them. And then I also say, is there anything else that I can do for you? I mean, I'm here, I'm a willing ear to listen. I try not to ask any specific questions about what happened unless they want to share that with me. And if they want to share that with me, what I tell everyone is that I'm a willing ear. And sometimes, especially with those parents, they just need somebody to let them talk, just to say those things out loud that they've been feeling and not felt like they maybe had the opportunity, or that person didn't allow them the opportunity to just talk about how they're feeling, especially our parents. I think that sometimes we get really focused on our victims and we forget how devastating this is to parents. And
Mhm.
so letting those parents just really talk and how they're feeling. And I will tell you, most of the time, once they get past that anger stage, then they start they internalize those things and start saying, this is my fault, I should have known. And I always tell people that that's not where we live. I mean, most of us don't get up and think, is my kid's grandpa going to molest them today? It's not the places that we live. And so it's not something that you need to beat yourself up about. It happened and we're going to walk that healing journey together. But what I see the most with families um, is that just internalizing that guilt and that just devastation from them. But I always want to tell them that this is something that happened to them. It doesn't dictate their life, because I feel like a lot of our families feel like that it's over. My kid's going to be impacted from the rest of their life and they're never going to get over this. And as long as we are helping them, guide them through that healing journey where they're getting those mental health services that they need in whatever form that is for them. Some people may do Western mental health. Some people may want to do their tribal ceremonies, and it's whatever is best for that family, but really helping them walk that healing journey and just telling them that this is not this, don't take the fault. This is someone else's fault. This is that perpetrator's fault. Don't internalize that to you. And just giving them a place to just vent sometimes is really powerful. But I don't think that you can. My thing is always going in there, just that simple, honest conversations and letting them lead you where they need to go.
And someone that's not certified like myself, it's okay if I don't want to talk to the child, and I could just talk strictly to the parent.
Yeah.
Okay.
I recommend just talking to the parents. I don't think that we need to talk to the kids. I mean, I really
I don't want to set them back to where they have to, be re-victimized. I don't like that term.
Yeah.
I just don't want to put them through that, and I don't like doing that, but I mean, before it was like, well, I apologize. I'm going to have to set you back. I don't want to, but, I just need to hear story. But, you don't have to tell me or anything. You could just write it down. It's completely fine if you don't want to talk about it. But they would just usually write it down. It's a short, sweet, to the point type description. It's not like a lengthy page or anything like that. And that's what I've been learning to do. But when it comes to a minor, that's why I get so confused and so nervous, because I'm just like, again, I don't want to come off. But now that I know that I can just only talk to the parent, that helps a lot.
Yeah. We tell everyone, really, we don't need to talk to the kids, because the parents, there's been a disclosure, the parents are going to know that, and they're going to be able to give you all the information that they need.
Okay.
I know sometimes it might be a little different if you're working with like a juvenile, that they may want to tell you their story and they may not want their parents particularly in there, depending on what the laws, within your tribe are, the laws within the state. They have the ability to do that. Sometimes is to say, I want to talk to you alone. And even
I'm in Oklahoma, so that's
okay. So yeah. I know the laws in your state then. Yeah, but yeah, I always just recommend just talking to the parents or the adult and getting all the information that you need, and you don't have to talk to the kids that way.
Okay,
Because
awesome.
it is about just decreasing that trauma, because this is such a traumatic event for them, and we want to just make sure that we're decreasing that trauma as much as we can.
Awesome. Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Deanna, Willard said, I work for Muskogee Creek Nation. We partner with a CAC in Tulsa for forensic interviews. And then Michelle wrote, We work with our local regional CAC. Our MDT team includes our program, tribal police and tribal social services.
Okay. Is it a state team or is it a tribal team?
I would say it would be a tribal team because she
It
said
sounds-
tribal police and tribal social services.
Oh, perfect. That's
And
awesome.
then Willard says that they work with the CAC in Tulsa for forensic interview. So I'm assuming that one might not be, but yeah, Michelle said
Yeah.
it is a tribal team.
Oh, awesome. That's amazing. I'd like to talk to them about their tribal team. I'm trying to get a list of tribal teams because we just don't have a listing for all of our tribal teams that are out there. The Tulsa CAC is a state CAC. Yeah, it's really a great one, but yeah, it's a state CAC.
And Michelle will be at the the TSASP Institute too. So
Oh, awesome.
well,
I'm really excited about being able to see
you're
everybody.
introduced.
Yeah. Well, this is my email address. And so if anybody has any further like questions or anything that you need clarification on, or would like to just set up a time to talk through the process, I'm always willing to do that. And I have some other team members that are really great. I will be at the Institute. I'm really excited about seeing everybody in person. But if we can also do any training in your community, we have tons of training that we offer. And I didn't put it in here, but nativecac.org, I need to put that into the slide, is our website. We have also learning briefs, we have webinars, so we have a lot of different resources as well on our website, and nnctc.com.org, I think, is our National Native Children's Trauma Center website as well.
Okay, and Bernie says that her tribe has a tribal prosecutor, ICWA caseworker, FBI, AUSA.
That's
Okay.
state
CAC,
prosecutor.
yeah, CAC staff and tribal police.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, if you have that, your team, I'd love for you to shoot me an email just so that we can kind of get them on we're trying to do a list of our tribal teams and tribal CACs across the nation. No one's ever done that. We're doing a little mapping program this next year, or mapping project, to really look at seeing if we can get all of the tribal MDTs that are operating across the nation, as well as all the tribal CACs. It seems like we are uncovering them all the time about, yeah, we've been doing this work for 20 years. And so we're always excited to hear about tribal teams and want to just kind of have a listing of them. Well, I just really want to thank you guys for allowing me to just talk to you today and to talk through these things. And if we can be a resource for you or help you in any way, we certainly want to do that. And we certainly want to hear from you. And, we just want to make sure that we're meeting the needs in the field if someone has one that we can meet. And so just thank you so much for letting me be here today.
And I would just like to thank everybody. I know you guys have busy schedules, so we always greatly appreciate the time that you give us for this once a month. I do want to let you know though, next grant cycle, we're only going to be doing the Connect and Reflect quarterly. So it'll be only once every 3 months. We did send, just a friendly reminder, we did send out Save the Date. It still has, Save the Date was approved, but we're not approved for the conference yet, which would be in September for the TSASP Institute. So we're still planning it for September, like it's approved because they approved some things already. So we're moving forward, and that will be in Tucson, Arizona. And I don't have the dates. Hold
Is
on.
it in Tucson or Phoenix?
It's in Scottsdale, actually. Sorry.
Scottsdale, yeah.
Yeah. It is the 24th, 25th, and 26th. And it is the Talking Stick Casino that we'll be going to. Yeah, we don't have anything with approval yet for you guys to put in for travel. Yep. As soon as we get that, we will send that right out, but right now we're just still plugging along. So I like to thank everybody for that. But that's where it's gonna be, the Talking Stick, and like I said, it's Scottsdale. I'm going to Tucson on Sunday. I'm just confused, that's all.
I'm in Tucson right now. I was thinking, oh, that'd be awesome if it was here, but I thought it was there. So
Yeah, yeah. Linda said the St. Croix tribe will also be there.
yeah.
Oh, cool. So I hope you have a nice rest of your day. And like I said, again, thank you so much for participating, and thank you, Deanna, for your time and spending with us today.
Yeah. Yeah. Uncle Key, thank you.